Well, I'd like to say how wonderful it is to be here, and also to discover a new title for my dear friend and our national coordinator here in the US, Coach Bieber. It actually expresses some of his gifts very well. And I'd like to thank Diane for your kind welcome, and the administration of Baptist Medical Center. I think this day is a sign, really, a witness at a prophetic level and level of enlightened leadership for contemporary forms of the ancient healing arts. And we live in an age of rapid and sometimes frightening change, time of crisis in all our institutions. And in ordinary times, all you need is good management. But in times of crisis, you need enlightened leadership. And I think to give the time, the space, and the support to a day like this, which we come together to reflect upon the deeper meaning of healing, of wholeness, of what medicine means in the modern world, I think that is at a level of enlightened leadership. And I'd like to thank Carol Whitfield too, especially for all the support and way that she has facilitated our coming together today. Well, I'd like to begin by, well, first of all, to say just what I'll be doing. I'll speak, and I hope what I say will maybe, based on previous experience, I would say linger in your minds for maybe 5 or 10 minutes. But I would also like to share a time of meditation practice with you, as I'll be speaking primarily about the power of meditation. And I think the power of meditation, we could say quite simply, is that it reveals to us in itself what we mean by the power of life. So I'll be speaking about this, but more important actually, because what I'm speaking about is an experience, it's a reality, it's a fact, it's not a theory. I'm not going to try to persuade you or convince you about the ideas that I'll put before you, but I would like to offer you the opportunity to experience what I'm speaking about, because that, I think, is proof enough in itself. I was, a few months ago, probably, I was invited to dinner by a friend who had organized some talks for me. And he said, would you mind coming around to dinner, and we'll have invite a few friends who I would like to introduce to meditation, and I'd like to start a meditation group at our parish. So I said, is your wife a good cook? And he said, the best. So I said, I would love to come. And so before the meal, about 4 or 5 of his friends came, and we had a little introduction to meditation, and then meditated together. And after the meditation, I said, anybody got any comments or any questions you'd like to raise? And one man who was there, who I knew was Chief Financial Officer of a big multinational company, whose name you would all know, said, how long was the meditation? So I said, 20 minutes. I said, that's what I would recommend as a sort of minimum, if you can. So he said, well, let me tell you something. He said, that could have been 20 seconds or 20 hours. He said, I went into something I had no words to describe, absolutely beyond my range of understanding or previous experience. And he said, I'm a religious person. He said, I'm not perhaps so spiritual, but I'm a religious person. He said, I have heard all these words like joy and peace and love and kingdom of God. You know, I hear all these words every time I go to church. And he said, I think that's what I experienced. So he said, I don't know. But he said, what is even more surprising, he said, is I almost didn't come here this evening because I'd had a really terrible day. He said, one of the things I'm most ashamed of in my life is my inability to control my anger. So just ask my family, ask my colleagues at work. And he said, today was just one of those terrible days. I got off on the wrong foot, somebody disappointed me, didn't produce a report as I wanted, and I flew off the handle, and I've been like a bull in a china shop all day, and taking it out on everybody and shouting at everybody, and I just felt, when I do it, I hate myself, and I just wanted to go home and go to bed. But he said, I came here because a friend had invited me. So he said, that makes it even more amazing that I went from that state of mind into this experience like that. Well, what does that show? The important thing is what happens next. First of all, though, it shows that meditation is opening us to a pre-existing or a totally existing reality. It doesn't matter what you think about it so much. That if you open yourself through meditation, the time-honored wisdom of meditation, to the state of silence and stillness and simplicity, which meditation is, what we call contemplation, then you are opening yourself to a reality that's there. And the reality is bigger than what you think. Bigger than all your belief systems, bigger than all your ideas, bigger than all your preconceptions about what it is. So he just slipped right into this. And the other thing it shows us is that it is, from a spiritual or religious point of view, it does not depend upon your merits. You can be the worst possible kind of person. And he obviously felt himself to be a pretty horrible person that day anyway. And he's very aware of his character defects, which he's struggling with day by day. And yet, grace, gift, spontaneity, something we cannot predict or measure or control, is at work. So this is what he experienced. That may and almost certainly will not happen to you when we meditate this morning. And maybe even telling the story spoils it a bit for you because you're wondering whether it will happen. But that doesn't matter at all. What matters is what happens next. And in his case, I was able to find out, as I met his friend the other day in London. And I said, did so-and-so continue meditating? And he said, yes, he comes to the meditation group every week now, if he's in town. Now, I'm certain that this man will not have the same experience as he had that first time every time he meditates. It doesn't work like that. But he saw something, he experienced something, he knew something that has changed his life and his approach to healing himself and integrating himself and finding a balance for his life. And that is what really matters, is that continuity of practice. So I tell that story simply to really emphasize that meditation does not depend upon any particular preconception you have about it, or does not really depend ultimately on any particular belief system that you may or may not have. It's a fact. We can simply say, God is. The God who reveals himself in the biblical tradition in the burning bush does not give him or herself a name. Moses wants to name this new experience of divinity that he has had, and that sends him off to see Pharaoh and set my people free. He's a little nervous. He wants to know, which among the many divinities of the region you are. So, what's your name? And this God, the living God, the true God, does not allow himself to be named. He simply says, I am. So it is. So that's what meditation is fundamentally oriented towards, this fact of reality, this deepest dimension of being. So that's why I think it's important that we take a little time to meditate together. If we have time in this session, we can have a little time for questions as well, or you'll be able to do that in the panel anyway. Two other things I'd like to just put before you to sort of set the scope of what I'd like to share with you. That was an experience of going into a hospital some time ago at about tea time in England, which is about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. And there's a little ritual takes place in every institution in England at that time, which is tea is made and people sit and have a cup of tea, even patients. So I was visiting somebody in the hospital and the tea was being brought around, and I was watching the nurses who were doing it. And there were really two kinds of nurses. There was the kind who seemed to be very stressed, didn't smile, seemed to be under pressure, sometimes seemed to be very touchy, very irritable, and would bring the cup of tea to the patient, put it down on the bedside table without a smile, without a kind word. And then there was another kind of nurse who seemed to be coping with stress and pressure much more pleasantly, and seemed to be able to pay attention, key word of what I'm going to say this morning, to pay attention to the patient. And when they brought them the tea, they would put it down nicely on the table and say, here you are, dear, here's a nice cup of tea. Two different ways of doing the same job. Which of those two ways do you think was better? Who was not only earning their money more effectively, but who was actually involved more fully in the healing art, which is what? Making people feel better. Making people better. Which of those two kinds of nurses, and I'm making no judgment about, about them as individuals, but there were clearly two different ways of doing the same task. Which of those two ways was closer to the goal of medicine and to the goal of being humane to people in distress? And the other thing I'd like to put before you is a piece of advice. If you're looking for a SIM card, a telephone SIM card, when you're at Atlanta Airport, speak to me afterwards and I'll tell you where to go. Because I tried to get, yesterday on my way here, I tried to get a SIM card. We went to a couple of little shops which we thought might sell them. They sold phones. But the sales assistants were either had never heard of SIM cards or phones, couldn't understand my accent, and seemed to be rather uninterested in doing something that was a little bit out of their range of their comfort zone of expertise. But anyway, then we saw another store, and we went in there, and there was a young woman who was serving there on her own. And she was on her own, and people were coming in all the time. And she knew exactly what we were talking about. She was an expert, or she was qualified, she was informed, she was competent, she was well trained. So that's important in any task. You expect some degree of competence and training and information. But then putting the SIM card in the device and then getting it activated by some satellite in the sky, that was a little more complicated. But she stayed with us during that process. And other customers were coming in, and she kept an eye on them, and she would say, "Welcome to," I think it was Emotion was the name of the store. "Welcome to Emotion," and anything I do, let me know what I do now. So she was managing everything very well, but peacefully, but keeping her focus on solving this technical problem that we brought her. And then the flight was being called, and she was still on hold to this satellite in the sky. And I said, "We've got to go." I said, "Would you mind, continuing the call? And maybe when we get to Jacksonville, the thing will work." So she said, "Okay." So we got on the plane and sat on the plane, and then of course we got off the plane in Atlanta because somebody hadn't done their job. The plane couldn't work. So I came out again, so maybe 10, 15 minutes later, back into the store. She was still on the phone. Isn't that remarkable? How many people would have stayed on the phone when the immediate goal, the immediate sort of the customer wasn't there to check on them or ask them. And she saw the job through successfully, I hope, to the end. That's care and attention. Care and attention. This was somebody who was doing her work well. And you could tell from her personality, from her manner, that she was a woman of some integration, of some presence, somebody who was present. So that's what meditation is about, really. The word med, or the prefix med, which we find in meditation and medicine, is a Greek prefix that denotes, in many words, care and attention. So there is a very special link between meditation and medicine. Now, before I speak a little bit more about what meditation is, I'd like to just emphasize that there are different starting points for the practice of meditation. As you heard, Dan introduced me. I'm a Benedictine monk, and I began to meditate. I was very lucky and privileged to have been introduced to meditation by a spiritual teacher of great stature, Father John Main. And I teach meditation primarily, of course, essentially from this Christian tradition. But over the years, I've seen meditation change its social profile and its media image immensely. 25 years ago, meditation was definitely a bit spooky or a bit freaky or a bit marginal or a bit flaky. And people made jokes about it. Well, that's changed. It's changed quite astonishingly. And you're more likely today to be advised to meditate by a physician or by a psychotherapist than you are by a monk or a priest or a clergyman. And that's a very significant and interesting development. The new understanding of meditation that has unfolded in a secular society such as we are. Secular does not mean anti-religious or unreligious. Secular means that religion occupies an equal space within the society, and it cannot claim any special privileges. That religious people in a secular society cannot impose their views on other people. They have to negotiate when it comes to the laws or the customs of the society. They have to negotiate with people of different beliefs. And in a sense, I think a secular society is the best kind of society. You've separated religion and state, or theoretically you have anyway, in the United States by your constitution. So what we've seen then in the last 25, 30 years is an ancient spiritual wisdom that has been communicated through the great religious traditions for millennia, thousands of years, now recognized by science, which is the great advocate of the secular. The scientific method is agnostic. It focuses upon data, it focuses upon experimentation, it focuses upon results. It doesn't matter what you believe as a scientist. So it is science, or the scientific method, that has discovered, researched, experimented with meditation, and has come to a completely secular conclusion that meditation is good for you. We know, and yes, we'll hear this later, my friend Jonathan will probably speak about this as well, but we know that meditation reduces your cholesterol, it improves your blood pressure, boosts your immune system, helps you deal with a wide range of psychological conditions, from anxiety attacks, panic attacks, insomnia, and so on. My own small contribution to this field is to have proven conclusively that meditation does not restore your hair. But in everything else, we can say meditation is good for you. Just generally good for you, physically and psychologically and mentally. So there are different levels, of course, of motivation, and then they bring you to begin the practice of meditation. You may begin because you go to your doctor and you say, "Doctor, I've got this pain in my chest, and I can't sleep at night, and I get panic attacks, and I'm shouting at my children all the time, and I don't think I'm going to be able to continue work, and I feel really my whole life is terrible. And have you got something for me?" And the doctor may well say, "Yes, I can give you a few pills. But have you ever thought about the way you're living? Have you ever thought maybe your lifestyle is wrong and you could live differently? And have you ever thought about meditation? Because we know that meditation can help you in all of these symptoms, or all of the causes of all of these problems that you have." So that might be your first level of motivation, just to solve immediate problems. And who would deny the efficacy of that, the value of that? Now, looking at that phenomenon, or those results, that research from a spiritual point of view, as I do when I look at meditation, I would say, basically, this is perfectly consistent with a spiritual understanding of meditation. Because I believe that grace works on nature. The grace of God, which we experience as a healing force, a healing power, doesn't just come in some sort of beamed down from outer space, but that it emerges from within the human condition, physical, psychological, and spiritual. And so, if we open ourselves to this, what I called at the beginning, this pre-existing reality within us, or you could say the pre-existing reality that we are in, then if we open ourselves to that, then we change. We will experience changes within our human condition. And the first level at which we can feel, measure, or perceive these changes will be our physical and our psychological level. So I think certainly if you want to meditate just to reduce your stress levels or to improve your immune system, fine, that's okay. I believe, however, and this is where we move to the second level of motivation, I believe that if you do the practice, the power of meditation is that it is a self-authenticating practice. If you do the practice, if you meditate, you will then find yourself shifting, moving to another level of awareness at which you are aware of yourself, let's say, as a spiritual being. What does that mean? It doesn't mean you become angelic, or transparent, or bodiless, or perfect. It means that you become aware of yourself as capable of a harmony between the different dimensions and aspects of yourself, who you are, how you operate. There's a harmony between these different dimensions. And if you don't have that harmony, then you won't be able to bring a cup of tea with a smile to a sick person. Because you lack that inner harmony, that inner peace that makes you smile, that makes you able to care for someone else and give attention to someone else other than yourself and your own problems. So this is what I mean by spiritual being. We become aware that we actually have this capacity for a wholeness, or for a harmony, for an integration that is really the source of human happiness and the source of human compassion. So in other words, we become aware of, it's actually a bigger world than I thought I lived in. That the horizons become much greater, and the view of reality in which we are living becomes much more clear. So that's what I mean by the spiritual. Then I think there is also a third dimension, which we won't go into today in particular, but I'll probably be going into this weekend when I'm giving a retreat here in Jacksonville, into the specific interpretation or the specific religious meaning, you might say, of what is happening on this journey of meditation. I was taking part a few days ago in an interreligious conference in which several major world religions came together, and we talked about the contemplative dimension of faith in the light of meditation, how this opens up the common ground between us, but also how, as a meditator, you go in more deeply into and discover more personally the meaning of the particular religious tradition that you may say I belong to, whether it's Christian or Buddhist or Hindu or Taoist or Jewish or whatever. So there's that third level of motivation in which you meditate, because it is in a wonderful way and in an inspirational way and a revelatory way, it is illustrating or exposing the meaning of your religious identity. But as I say, we won't go into that. We'll look primarily just at those first two levels of practice, the physical the me-centered. Am I going to feel better because I meditate? Is it going to help me be more peaceful and a nicer person and solve some of these life issue problems that I have? And secondly, the spiritual level at which we become aware that we are more than our problems, more than our symptoms, that we are in fact, we are not just human beings on a spiritual journey, but we are spiritual beings on a human journey. Where we become aware of the spiritual dimension of our humanity. The key word so far that I've used really is attention. Attention is the essence of prayer, and when you think about it, it is the essence of all good work. If you can't pay attention to the work you're doing and sustain that attention, then your quality of your work is going to be diminished. And attention ultimately is personal. You can fake attention. You can pretend you're paying attention to someone, paying attention to what you're doing, but you're actually not. And we usually become quite good at that. Children are not good at that. It's one of the great gifts of education, is that it helps us to pretend to pay attention when we're not. So that the teacher will throw something at us or pick us out in the class. But actually, when attention is real, think of the work that sales assistant and getting our SIM card connected, then it is personal. And you feel a personal connection with the person who's paying attention.